Your rank, name, and branch?
William Mcdowell. I'm a retired First Sergeant, United States Marine Corps.
And what years were your service?
From 1945 to 1968.
Now, Jack, can you tell me where you were born and describe what your family life was like?
Sure. I was born in Newark, New Jersey on October the 20th, 1927. And I don't remember that, of course, but I'm told by my family that shortly after I was born, we moved to Montclair, New Jersey, and stayed there until I believe it was 1933, when the house burnt down. I was accused of setting the fire at 5 years old, and so we got evicted and ended up moving to Lower Manhattan in New York. My father was a baker, and he got a job working in Lower Manhattan where he could walk to work. So we lived in an area most people refer to as Little Italy, and we were there for a couple of years, and then we moved out to Queens and then to Brooklyn.
And living in Brooklyn and Queens, what was daily life like? Were there issues with the mob, or did the Depression have a major effect by chance? Or
Well, yeah, as a kid, we weren't aware of the Depression, but it was going on at that time. We went to the New York City public school systems, played in the streets, got in fights, did what New York kids do, and I think it was around maybe 12 years old. I made a shoe shine box and shined shoes on the subway in New York. Eventually ended up in high school in Queens. Even after we moved to Brooklyn, I commuted by train. My brother and I did to Queens to high school every day. And then from high school, we studied on the train because it was about an hour's trip either way. And I think around the time I was 14, 15, I got jobs working in restaurants, and I was a stock boy in the summertime for a bookbinding company. And I think at one time, one summer job was working for Pan American Airways at LaGuardia Airport on the China Clipper. We cleaned the plane, and little odd jobs like that. So
you worked on a Pan Am?
Yeah,
Pan Am Clipper?
well, it was a summer job for the kids. We cleaned the China Clipper plane and other aircraft in the area. The interiors mostly. Mm-hmm.
Now, growing up, also in New York, was it ever a struggle for your parents to provide food on the table, or how much of an effect did the Depression have on your family?
I don't know, because it was when I was a small child. During World War II, the beginning of World War II, which started in December of '41, up until the time I went in the military, rationing of all kinds of consumer goods were in effect. That, I guess, for my mother's, was difficult because you had ration stamps, and the ration stamps were used to buy whatever you could get for the ration stamps. So I do recall that meat and certain canned goods and things like that were scarce. Was scarce. But we survived. We ate a lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. It was okay. During the war, there were blackouts. My father was an air raid warden. He was also a World War I veteran. So he walked around with his little airway warden hat on, his flashlight, and we had to keep the lights out and, drapes covering the windows and that sort of thing. It's kind of interesting. As a kid, we thought it was kind of exciting.
Did you help him with that?
No, we listened to the radio a lot. That's about it.
Did you listen to, what were some of your favorite shows that you listened to? Did you ever listen to Little Orphan Annie or any?
No, I didn't listen to the Lord. I think I listened to The Shadow and, oh God, I guess my father listened to a lot of news. I remember a news reporter by the name of Gabriel Heater. He listened to him a lot, but he was interested in what was going on around the world in connection with the war, both in Europe and in the Pacific area. So.
Did that, as a byproduct, influence you? Were you aware of what was happening around the world, or?
Yes, we went to the movies and the newsreel. They had the newsreel as a part of the routine for the movies. You had movies and some kind of exciting chapter and a comedy and a newsreel. And so, but as kids, we were more interested in the movies rather than current events. So, yeah.
Well, talking about motion pictures, I'd like to regress back. Can you recall watching anything about the Berlin Olympics in 1936 and Jesse Owens?
No. That was much later in my life. I saw that.
Still a little too young.
Yeah, we didn't pay any attention to that stuff. We were more interested in girls and and what was going on during the war and the movies.
Can you recall hearing about Pearl Harbor and what you were doing?
My brother and I and my little gang of thugs were in the movie in Queens. We call it the itch or the scratch or the dump because of how scroungy it was. And I remember on December the 7th, 1941, we were in the dump, and the lights came on, and the manager of the theater made an announcement that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, and so everybody threw stuff at him and told him to turn the movie back on because nobody cared about what happened in Hawaii. It was a foreign country where a bunch of people danced and did the hula hula, and we had no idea what he was talking about. I found out after we got home, and my father explained to us what had happened. It was then that we realized what happened.
The severity.
Yeah. It was a lot to take in,
Can you recall how you felt when you realized what had happened? Was it anger? Or?
Well, I was 14 years old, and I was kind of, we didn't have television, we didn't have pictures to look at, so we could only hear what happened on the radio. And very difficult to imagine what happened. Now, the following weekend, or two, we went back to the movies, and on the newsreel, they had some footage of what happened at Pearl Harbor. And then that's when I realized that this is a pretty big deal, A lot of people were killed. A lot of ships and property was damaged. Quite amazing, and a little scary.
Did you feel that the Japanese or the Germans were going to invade at that time?
No, that didn't come to mind at the time. Never had that fear that the Japanese or the Germans are going to invade our country. We did hear things about submarines and this sort of thing offshore, the East Coast and the West Coast, but didn't really dawn on us that we were going to be invaded. we did hear that a lot of Japanese citizens got picked up and put into these relocation camps or whatever they were called at the time. We realized that that didn't happen to people of German heritage on the East Coast. That didn't happen to them. So we're a little puzzled about why the Japanese. The word that we got was that they were afraid of sabotage and spies and things of that sort. But why the Japanese and not the Germans? You know. So.
See, there was a paradox there.
Yes, it was. It was. And we just didn't understand that, but that's politics, you know.
And while this had just happened, you're hearing about German U-boat attacks off the coast. You mentioned that you had a group of friends that you loved to dance. Were you into fashion by chance, or did you guys wear zoot suits or anything like that?
No. That's we couldn't afford any of that stuff anyhow. You know, we were just street kids. You know, well, I wore knickers and kids' shoes with holes in them.
And I forgot to ask, did you have any brothers or sisters?
I had one brother and one sister. My brother was a year older than me, and my sister was 6 years younger. Yeah.
So while growing up in the U.S. during the war, did you and your friends ever try to do like tin can drive-ins, gather like metal scraps or anything for the war effort?
Not really. You know, even before the war, we would what was it? We would sell newspaper stacks of old newspapers to Joe the junk man as he came by with his horse and wagon, and he would weigh them and probably give us 10 cents a bundle or something like that. We would try to sell enough to raise enough money to go to the movies, which was 10 cents at the time. No, we played in the street in the winter and in the summer, and had a great time playing cowboys and Indians and going to the movies and just playing the street and going to school. That's about it. And trying not to get in trouble. And then as I got a little bit older, I got odd jobs cutting grass, and especially during the summertime when school was out working, trying to help my parents a little bit with some bucks. Mostly shining shoes on the subway from Brooklyn to the Bronx and back on Saturdays and Sundays. You got to be pretty tough to shine shoes on the subway because the older guys chase you away. You know, sometimes I'd get off and hang around on the corners in Broadway and Times Square area, and the older guys would chase you away and claim that corner is their corner, and you know we get in fist fights, and sometimes I'd win, sometimes I'd lose. You know, and it was a challenge. You know. But that's New York. You have to be ready for battle all the time in New York, especially when you're a kid. You know.
So the trenches or the streets of New York pretty much set you up for the Marine Corps, so to speak.
At the time, I didn't realize that it was, but in retrospect, you get to the point where you realize that maybe, you know, growing up in New York wasn't all that bad, you know. My brother went in the Marine Corps a year before me, and he came home and told me a bunch of lies, and I said, boy, it sounds like interesting. By that time, I was in high school, of course, and in New York, you take a thing called the Regents exam. It's a state exam. And if you want to go to college, you have to graduate, and you have to pass the Regents exam. And I took the Regents exam and passed it, which shocked everybody. My members of my family kind of thought that maybe I was dumb as a rock anyhow, but I shocked everybody and passed the Regents exam, barely. And there's no point in hanging around for high school graduation, so I went down to the induction center and told the guy I wanted to join the Marine Corps. And he said, "How old are you?" And I said, "I'm 17 and a half." He says, "Parents got to sign that piece of paper." So I took it home and forged my mother's signature and brought it back the next day. And he asked me, did my parents sign the form? And I said, "Yes, sir." And he sent me into another room and I got a physical exam, and this was in 1945. And I found out later that they were really trying to get as many people in and trained as possible because they were looking forward to the invasion of Japan. So I passed the physical and everything and went home and told my mom what was going on, and she slapped me and called me all kinds of stupid idiots and told me I was going to die and all this business. You know, she was upset. And but she got over it, and 3 days later I was gone. Yeah, that fast. And was transferred down to I went with a group of other guys, you know, from New York, by train to Washington D.C. First time I'd been out of the New York, New Jersey area in my life, and we arrived in Washington D.C. Had a layover there for a few hours. We walked around for a minute, and then we got on another train heading south. And then I realized that I was getting off in North Carolina and they were going to South Carolina. These were all people going in the Marine Corps, and they were going to Parris Island, South Carolina. I was getting off in North Carolina. When we left Washington, D.C., we were all excited. You know, there was one guy, he was older than the rest of us. I think he was 22 or something like that. And he was in charge of us. The conductor, or the guy came through the train, collecting tickets and things, and we had what we call transportation requests that they give you. So we didn't have tickets, and they came to our car and they said, "What are you doing here?" And I, "What do you mean, what am I doing here? I'm going to the Marine Corps, you know." He says, "No, you got to go in the colored people's car." What? He said, "You got to go in the color. Where's the colored people's car?" And the 22-year-old guy said, "Yeah, he's with us, you know." He said, No. You got to go in the colored people's car." Where is that? It's up front. There was a lot of discussion about that. And that's when I really first began to realize that this thing called segregation was real, you know.
That was your first experience?
Yeah, I had heard about it and I read things. We had a newspaper in New York called the Amsterdam News, and the Amsterdam News had articles in it about that sort of thing, but I never paid much attention to it, you know. So I got my little bag, said goodbye to the guys, and wandered up through the train to the colored people's car, you know, and I got there and it was jam-packed with folks. I found one seat and I stayed in the colored people's car until we got to, I think it was Weldon, North Carolina, some town in North Carolina. Got off the train. I had to go to the bus station to get a bus to Jacksonville, North Carolina. And it was early in the morning. Older couple was walking towards me on the sidewalk there, and I was going to the bus station. And as they walked past me, an African-American couple, and they walked past me and they said, "Good morning." That was rather odd. I never had anybody that didn't know me say good morning. That's very suspicious. I thought they were up to something, so I kind of watched them over my shoulder, but they kept walking, you know. Very strange behavior. I wasn't used to that. But I found out years later that that's the way people are in the South, you know, they say good morning.
What do you call Southern hospitality?
I guess,
That kind of
I
thing?
don't know.
Like
I mean,
sugar, honey.
In our same apartment building, nobody ever said good morning to me, you know. Get out of the way, kid, or something like that. But I got to the bus station and walked in, and the guy said, "Get out!" What are you talking? What? He said, "Get out of here, go around the back." I said, "What's back there?" He says, "You'll see, get out of here." You can't go in the front. You have to go in the colored people's waiting room in the back, you know. So I walked around, I saw a sign that said colored only or something, and I went in a little room, and the guy opened the window. It's the same guy. I said, "What do you want?" I says, "I'm going to Jacksonville." Thing. He says, "Wait here." He closed the window, and he came back. He said, "Give that to the bus driver. The bus will be here in 30 minutes. I said, "Okay." So I waited. There was a couple other people in there, and we got on the bus and went to Jacksonville. Got off the bus at Jacksonville, and I asked some guy, I said, "How do I get to this place called Moffett Point?" And he says, "Well, it's a little ways." He said, "A long walk." He said, I guess you can call them and they'll come and get you or something. So I saw a cab over there, you know, so I had $2 or $3, you know, so I went over and I opened the back door and I said, "Moffett Point," you know, and the guy, "What?" I said, "I'm going to Moffett Point." He said, "Where are you from, kid?" I said, "New York." He said, "Oh, another one." He says, "Okay, get in," you know. But see, in the South at that time, if you were colored, as we were called at that time, you just don't do things like that, you know. You ask, "Sir, can you take me to Moffett Point?" No, I didn't. In New York, you just get in a cab, you know. So, and you have to be very polite, you know, because you have to be subservient. That's the way it was back in the day, you know. So he took me to Moffett Point. You know, I think it cost 60 cents or 65 cents or something like that. I told him, I gave him $1, keep the change. Big spender. Moffett Point camp.
Can you recall what it was like arriving there? And
Yeah,
what did you experience?
I have a vivid recollection of Moffett Point. It was a long road with trees on either side, and we got to this little shack, and there were two guys with pith helmets, you know, and big pistols hanging off of them, two black guys. And they said, "What do you want?" I said, "I'm coming in the Marine Corps." He said, "Where you come from?" I said, "New York." I said, "Sit your ass over there," you know. And I said, "What the hell's the matter with these guys? You know, they're not very hospitable, you know." He said, "Let me see your paperwork." And I showed it to them, you know. And they started hollering at me. So they didn't even know me, you know. It was very puzzling, you know. So I got a little defensive, and I, you know, if somebody gets in your face in New York, you get in their face, you know. "Sit down. Who told you to stand up?" I said, "Well, they got guns. I better be careful," you know. And they kept this up, and then finally some pickup truck arrived, you know. The driver was hostile, you know. He says, "Get in the truck." So I started to get in the cab of the truck. He said, "Get in the back. You don't sit in the truck with me, you boot, you know, a recruit or whatever they call you, idiot, you know." They took me down to some area. I thought I'd gone into a mental institution. Everybody was screaming and shouting. It was all black folks, you know. They were calling each other names. They were running. Everybody was sweating. This was in April, April. Everybody's screaming and shouting, and it was a complete mayhem, you know. Some guy screamed something, "What do you want?" You know, and I said, "Go over there and sit down." And finally some older guy, he's probably 22 years old, he said, "Are you Mcdowell?" And I said, "Yeah." "Get on your feet." "What do you mean, yeah?" You know? And they go through the whole business, you know. And he told me to go in that hut and don't come out. And I went in this little, I don't know what you call it.
A Quonset?
No, it wasn't a Quonset hut. It was a kind of there was a whole bunch of them, you know. It looked like cardboard shacks or something. and so I went in, there was nobody in there, you know. There was bunks, double deck bunks. And a coal stove where you shovel coal in to heat up the building, you know. And I heard all this noise outside, and I sat there and I said, "Well, what am I going to do here, you know?" And finally some guy came and he says, "Okay." He says, "You stay in this building, you don't come out unless somebody comes in and tells you to come out." And he says, "There are going to be other people joining you over the next 2 days." I said, "Well, what am I going to eat?" "Shut up, you know." "We'll tell you when you're going to eat and when you're not going to eat, you know. Just keep your mouth shut and do what you're told." And so around, must have been about 4 o'clock, some guy came in and got me, and he said, "Get on the back of that mob." And there was a bunch of other recruits, and we went down to the mess hall, and they gave you a tray, and they threw food in it, and it wasn't all that bad, you know. I mean, in New York, we ate the food. I tell you the truth, was kind of a little bit better than what I was used to, you know. And, but didn't have time to eat, you know. It's like as soon as I sat down to eat, it was time to get up and leave, you know. And back to the huts again, and then over time, more people arrived, and they formed a thing called a platoon, and eventually we got clothing and equipment, and everything that I wore went into my little bag, and that disappeared. I never saw it again. I thought they were going to send it to my mother's house, but I don't know what happened to it. And I think my platoon had 35 or 40 guys in it, you know, eventually, over a period of a week. My drill instructors, one was a corporal, and the other one was a private first class, you know. The private first class was kind of an idiot, but the corporal was a pretty squared away guy.
Can you recall their names?
Yeah, the corporal was Dudman, and the PFC was what was it? The first guy we had was Price, and the second PFC was White, PFC White. But Dudman was a pretty squared away guy. He'd been overseas and back already. By that, I think he was in Saipan or someplace like that. But the routine was physical conditioning, marching. We finally got our M1 rifles, and we learned all about that. And
did you ever get Grand Thumb?
Pardon?
Grand Thumb?
Of course, yeah. You know, you get the thumb caught in the bolt, you know. Just every day was running, going to the mess hall, physical conditioning, classroom, a lot of classroom stuff, you know, first aid, military justice. There was no uniform code of military justice at that time. It was the Articles of the Navy. And some of the guys, over a period of 9 weeks, disappeared. You know, they just couldn't take it any longer. They just went unauthorized absence, you know, disappeared. Yeah. But a lot of physical conditioning, a lot of harassment, a lot of hazing.
Can you recall any time where someone screwed up and you guys all had to pay for
Oh
it?
yeah. Every day, all day long. You know, somebody screw up and everybody else had to pay for it. You know?
Were there any major screw-ups that you witnessed? Or?
Of course, yeah. Well, fights. Two guys, you know, get in a fight and the whole platoon has to, you know, the things that the drill instructors made us do then, or the things that they did to the recruits then, nowadays they'd end up in court-martial, you know. I mean, it's pretty brutal. I mean, I got punched and kicked and spit on, you know. Me, I thought everything was funny. I couldn't stop laughing. You know, that was my problem. You know, when the drill instructor would get in my face and ask me what I was laughing about, I'd start laughing. You know, and everybody was telling me, "Stop laughing! You're gonna get us in trouble." You know, so I couldn't help it. You know, I thought these guys were crazy. You know? But and boot camp was. But it was interesting. I learned a lot. And we finally got to the point where we went out to the rifle range to fire for qualification. And I fired sharpshooter. I was very proud of that, you know, because you get extra pay if you get $3 more a month for sharpshooter, and at that time, if you fired expert, you get $5 more a month, you know. So I fired sharpshooter. You get marksman, sharpshooter, expert, you know. And we also fired the .45 pistol, you know.
Did you qualify on any weapon systems like a 1919 or a BAR? Or anything
No. At that time, in boot camp, you only fired the pistol and the M1 rifle. And then we graduated. Okay. And I turned out to be the right guide of my recruit platoon, which means you carry the guide on. It's kind of a prestigious position, you know.
Were you proud of that?
Yeah, I was pretty proud of that, you know. My Corporal Dudman, he took a liking to me eventually, you know. But that other one, you know, he was on me like white on rice, you know. He just gave me hell all the time, you know, for laughing at him.
Can you recall your class number by chance?
529, yeah.
Now, while
Platoon 529, yeah.
Now, while at Montford Point, did you ever encounter Gilbert Hashmark Johnson?
Not at that time. Not at that time. I graduated in the early part of June, and we were on a ship going somewhere at that time. We went down through the Panama Canal. It was very exciting. I had never, you know, of course, left that area of the States before. But, you know, we were all excited, you know, we didn't know where the hell we were going, you know. We got on the ship, and we got our little, you know, troops' quarters, and all the black guys were in one area, and the white people on the other end of the ship, you know.
So the ship was segregated?
Oh, everything was segregated, yeah. We all ate at different times and everything, you know. We arrived in Pearl Harbor, you know. And then we saw, by then, this is 45, this is several years later, we could still see where some damages and hulls of ships sticking up out of the water and stuff like that. But somebody had done a lot of work, and they still had a lot to do, but it wasn't as bad as I thought. We were only there I think 4 days, and we couldn't go to Waikiki Beach. Colored guys couldn't go to Waikiki Beach. We had to stay downtown Honolulu. You know, Smith Street comes to mind. I don't know why, but there was only a couple of blocks in there where we could go down. Yeah.
And what happens if you would leave that area?
Well, the military police would, nab you. You know. Yeah.
City police or MPs?
The military police. Yeah, MPs. Yeah. We were told not to go there. Stay in this one area, so that's what we did. And so we just hung around. Because of our age, we couldn't drink anything. Of course, some of the guys did. There's a lot of hookers and stuff around in the area. But we were told to behave ourselves, and we did. We didn't get in any trouble or anything like that.
Did you guys ever go to any of the beaches while there?
I didn't. We went down to an area. Wasn't a beach. It was just like a promenade area where you can see the water. But I mean, we looked at water for days and days anyhow, so it wasn't a big deal. Back aboard ship, and we ended up in a place, rather strange place called Okinawa. And offloaded. And we were on the west side of the island.
South or north of Shuri, if you can recall.
South area. We were near Kadena Air Force Base. Of course, we didn't know what that was at the time. There were 2 Air Force bases. One was kind of an airstrip, and then there was Kadena.
And were you already assigned to a unit at that point?
I joined the 38th Field Depot Company, and I didn't know it at the time, but that's what I was assigned to, along with a bunch of other guys. It was all in the Pacific during World War II. African American Marines were either in the 51st Defense Battalion, which was an anti-aircraft outfit, or in an ammunition company or a depot company. Okay, the ammunition companies, they handle ammo. The depot companies unloaded ships, boats, ships, and moved supplies and then by the time I got there, we brought Japanese prisoners back to the beach and guarded some Japanese prisoners. But for the most part, we were in charge of supply dumps in the beach areas and moving equipment. Earlier on, I heard that they used the guys in Saipan and Iwo Jima and places like that as stretcher bearers and things of that sort. And of course, when the Japanese attacked, then everybody, regardless of race, had to turn to and do what you had to do. But I became, well, let me see how I can explain this. I was asked, the next day after we arrived, we stowed all of our gear in some tents. Who knows how to drive? And I raised my hand. I'd never driven anything in my life. I'd never even sat in a car. I didn't know anybody that owned a car. The guy standing next to me says, "You don't know how to drive." But I sat in the cab of trucks, and I watched people drive, shifting gears and things. And I was thinking maybe I could do that, And this corporal, everybody's colored, black, African American. He was a little guy. He said, "Okay, boy." He said, "Let me see what you can do. Get in there." And the guy that was in the truck was on the beach in the sand. He said he left the motor running when he got out, so that was because I wouldn't know how to start it anyhow, you know. And so I got in this 2.5-ton thing. They call it a deuce and a half, and I pushed the clutch in and grinded some gears, and I thought I was doing it the way I was supposed to, but I had put the truck in reverse and stopped on down the gas, and sand flew and the truck flew back and the rear wheels went into the water, you know, and the guy was running along screaming, shouting, "Stop." And people were just laughing their asses off, you know. And, the rear wheels sunk in the turf a little bit. I finally got it stopped before I drowned the whole vehicle. And of course, he screamed and shouted and called me all kinds of idiots, you know, and cussed me out. And they had to get another truck and put some chains on it and pull it out of the water, you know. So I could not become a truck driver. I became an assistant truck driver. And so we spent most of our time hauling ammo down to the front lines, down in the Shuri area towards Naha, and bringing Japanese prisoners back to the beach. Wasn't that many, but we brought them back, you know. And then one day somebody said something about an atomic bomb was dropped on in Japan. Well, nobody paid much attention to that because we didn't know what the hell they were talking about. But a couple of days went by and we found out that they dropped these atomic bombs. And then there's rumors about how many people were killed and how much damage was done. It was very puzzling because we couldn't figure how one bomb can do all that, you know. So we kind of thought it was rumors, you know, until maybe a week went by and we found out that, wow, this is pretty devastating, you know. And then as a result, we thought, now we're really going to invade Japan. But of course, we didn't know what was going on. And we found out later that, I think it was in August, that the Japanese surrendered. So then, we thought, well, the war's over, we're going to go home. But no, we all got saddled up and boxed up all our stuff and went aboard ship. And we went to the southern island of Honshu and went into a shipyard called Sasebo, or Sasebo, whichever one. And that was all busted up and blown up. But thousands of Marines, there must have been the whole division was in that area. And of course, 38th Field Depot, and there were other depot companies, depot and ammunition companies coming in also. The shipyard is huge. It's a pretty big shipyard. So we were housed in an old, what I call a butler building, for a few days, and we didn't know what we were going to do. And finally, the staff sergeant told us that we were going to be engaged in humanitarian work. We didn't know what that meant. But it ended up, I was in a convoys going to Nagasaki, taking all kinds of food and medical supplies and heavy equipment, and about an hour and a half, 2 hour drive because of the roads were all filled up with traffic. And the Japanese, the police were, you know, directing traffic. So they hooked up what we call a water buffalo to my truck, and we were hauling water, and there were several trucks hauling water into Nagasaki because the Japanese people there, where the bomb fell, they didn't have anything to eat or no water to drink or anything.
Could you describe the scene as you were entering Nagasaki?
Yeah, I didn't quite know what to expect on the outskirts. Nagasaki is kind of in a valley, so when we arrived in the area, I saw Japanese people on the road. They're in pretty bad shape. And then the closer we got into the city, you could see where, the bomb was an airburst bomb, and it didn't fall right in the center of the city. It was sort of on the outskirts. So much of the city was gone, but there was still parts of it that was untouched or still standing, touched but still standing. It's a good-sized city too. Kind of smelly, but the people was what unnerved me, because there were a lot of injuries, a lot of burn cases, a lot of people in pretty bad shape, very bad shape. In retrospect, nobody ever said anything about the fallout, the radiation or anything like that. That wasn't an issue as far at that time. And then we were sent to a certain part of the city to dispense the water. People lined up with their little buckets or whatever it is they could bring, and they got water. And we didn't have to do anything except bring the truck in, and there were two Japanese police officers there, I guess, keeping order, I just sat on top of the truck and watched. And then we were there for a couple of days, and then back to they had a desalination ship that was, and water purification people.
Up in the harbor.
Yeah, so that's where we picked up the water and back again. So we did that for a couple of weeks, and it seemed like early part of October, we were back aboard ship again. It was early October, yeah. Because I turned 18 on board that ship. And we thought we were going back to the States, But we ended up in northern China. I mean, it was a bunch of ships going. We went up to northern China. The whole 1st Marine Division was in northern China, I bet you there was 20, 30,000 Marines up there, And found out later that the reason for it all was because there were several things going on. Prior to World War II, I did all this
The nationalists
research.
and communists.
The national under Chiang Kai-shek and the
Zedong.
communists under Mao Zedong, they had a civil war going on, okay? Well, then when the war started with the Japanese, they all combined resources and they fought the Japanese. Now the war is over, and they're at each other's throats again about who's going to charge. But during the war, the Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek was an ally of the United States. And so we were resupplying him and his people and all that. Way up north in China, near Mongolia, they had 500,000 Japanese that had to be repatriated back to Japan. So we went into the port of Changkou, which is at the mouth of the Hai River, which if you go further inland, you end up in Peking at the time it was called. A huge shipyard there, bigger than the one in Japan. It went on forever. And so the black guys were security for the shipyard. It was about, I would say, 1,500 maybe somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 black guys, and Marines. And the rest were all white guys for the 1st Marine Division, okay? And I don't know, I can't remember what they did. The big problem was the Chinese at each other's throats, you know. You try to keep them separated, repatriating the Japanese back to Japan, resupplying Chiang Kai-shek and his armies, you know. And the trains that were going north with all kinds of food and ammunition, medical supplies and clothing for the nationalists were being, sometimes they'd mine the tracks and blow the trains off the track and steal everything, kill everybody, and steal all the stuff and sell it on the black market, you know. So, and then it turned out that some of the bandits were renegade communist soldiers, you know. So it was kind of a messy time. And the commanding general, I can't remember his name right now, he eventually said, well, for lack of a better word, put the N-word people on the trains, you know. And so that's how the black Marines became train guards. But you won't find it, I can't find it written anywhere, you know, in the history. All I have found in all these years was that the colored Marines were train guards. That was it.
Just that one sentence?
Yeah.
That's it?
Nothing else.
Were you one of those train guards?
Yeah.
Can you describe then how, for posterity's sake, how you arrived on these trains and what your duties were? And what
Well,
your
yeah. When they decided to put the black guys on the black Marines on the trains, there's several hundred of us in shifts. So these are boxcars, okay? And the locomotive was a coal locomotive, okay? So pretty dirty, soot and stuff. And then where the caboose is at the end of the train was like a car with seats in it and stuff, you know. But in between, it was all boxcars loaded down with all kinds of stuff going north. So the train would take off out of the port. We had a flat car in the front of the locomotive, 2 flat cars. The first one was to set off any mines on the track. The second one had a 50 caliber machine gun crew on it, you know, colder than hell. So, and then on every other boxcar, you had a Marine on the roof or near the roof, you know, in between cars. And inside every other boxcar was a Marine. Okay, so
2 per boxcar. One on top, one inside.
yeah, well, you alternate, you know, on the roof of this one, inside this one, on the roof of this one, inside that one, like that. So, and then of course inside was dark, there were no lights, and there was all kinds of crap, so you just had to find a place where you could lay down and relax, you know, and take it easy. And you're talking about a 4-day round trip, 4.5-day round trip, going north and back. Because the trains were only going like 20 miles, 25 miles an hour, you know. And nothing happened the first couple of times we went up. It was kind of boring, actually. We get up north, and then the coolies would come and unload the train. We didn't do any work. We just stand around and watch them, you know, and then they bring the Japanese in, we'd fill up the trains and take them back, you know, to the port. And then we would fall back, and then a new crew would come in and take the next train up, and then 4 or 5 days later, we'd be back again, you know.
I have a quick question. Do you ever have any issues of Japanese prisoners trying to escape?
No, they wanted to go home. You know. No, the big problem was that the communists the communists, they wanted to get at the Japanese, okay? Rogue elements tried to stir up trouble and stuff. And so the white Marines were up there dealing with that problem. We were just on the trains,
Were you guys ever attacked, though, by these rogue elements?
Well, on the trains, yeah. I think it was a third trip going north. I was sleeping behind the potato sacks, and I heard some noise. I wasn't quite sure what it was. It was dark inside, and I woke up, and while I was trying to figure out what the noise was, light came through the side of the boxcar. Well, then it dawned on me, I'm a little slow, I think somebody's shooting at the train, And then while I was thinking about that, another hole came through. And I said, holy shit, I'm gonna die, And so I stayed behind the potato sacks. And I heard a guy up on the roof running back and forth and hollering. And I said, what's wrong? I thought he was injured or something, the way he was hollering. But he was hollering at one of the other Marines on the other car. His name was Somerville, we call him Summertime. And I said, Summertime's up there raising hell. So, and then the train stopped. I heard all this noise, this racket, and I was why the train stopping? Well, what happened is, I think the bandits paid off the engineer, and he jumped out of the train. And so then the sliding door on the opposite side opened up, and the staff sergeant, the black guy, he said, who's in there? And I said, me, sir. He says, what are you doing? And I said, I think somebody's shooting at the train. He said, well, goddamn it, get over there and shoot back. That's the first time that happened, And he was gone. The door slid shut, and he was gone. I was trying to figure, who was that guy? I'd never seen him before, So I went over and I pushed the thing outside, and I peeped out about that much space, and I saw all these people out there running back and forth. There was a couple of horses, there was a couple of trucks, an old beat up some kind of car with 4 or 5 guys in it, Chinese people, and then another horse went by, and I had a carbine, an M1 carbine, with a 15-round magazine in it, and I just stuck it out and started shooting. I didn't even look, I didn't want to see what was going on, I was scared, And I heard Summertime up there running back and forth, and I emptied that one, I replaced the magazine, and I kept shooting, and he was making so much noise up there, I thought he was hurt, And then we started moving again. So I closed the door, and I said, boy, that was over, my heart was going like that, And so now it's my time to go up. We had to stop, take on water, because it was a steam engine. And so he was coming down, and I was going up. And he was hollering something at me, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. And he said something about a camel. And I said, what? And then he went down, and I went up. So we got up to the railhead where we're at the end of the trip. And there's all these Japanese people lined up, and then there were a bunch of trucks, and there was thousands of people up there, And he says, man, he said, you did it. And I said, what are you talking about? He says, you shot the camel. I said, I didn't shoot any camel. He says, yes, you did. He says, you hit the camel, and the camel went down, and that vehicle with those 4 or 5 guys in it behind it crashed into the camel and overturned. And I said, I had no record. I didn't see that, And he said, and so the story got passed around, you know. And I said, I missed the whole show, you know. I didn't see anything. And so the story got a little embellished, you know. And by the time we got back to the shipyard, to Tanku, it was all over the place. The guy who opened up the sliding door on the other side was a staff sergeant by the name of Hubert, what was his name? Zeke Klauser. So Zeke Klauser came over to me. He said, "You did a hell of a job, kid." I said, "I don't know what I did, you know." He said, "Well, whatever it was," he says, "you did a good job." He says, and so we went back to our little raggedy Butler building and hung out. People played cards and shot dice, and we washed our clothes, and that was about it. That's all we did in northern China. And we made about 7 or 8 trips like that, and we did get hit. The 7 or I think it was 8 trips while I was there, while we were there, we got hit about 3 times, you know. And but by then I was an old pro, you know. And we left China. We were back in the States at Mulford Point. We were gone. I was gone a year from the time we left until the time we got back. It was about 13 months. We were right back to Mulford Point again.
Was that the only time you ever fired your carbine in anger, so to speak, was on that trip?
Yeah, 3 different times, and yeah.
Was just during that, nowhere on Okinawa? Or
No. The only thing I did on Okinawa, well, in one convoy going south, one of the trucks way up front hit a mine, and I thought we were going to die. I jumped out of the truck I was in and into a ditch, but nothing happened back where we were, you know. And then I got it one day. The sergeant said, "Come here, kid," and he said, "I want you to throw a grenade in that hole. We think there's some Japanese in here." I said, "Well, that's the first time I've seen a grenade being used, but I never did one." He says, "You got to pull that pin out real hard." He says, "And just throw it in the hole." And there was 5 or 6 or 10 other people hanging around, you know. And so, is there anybody in there? Well, that's what we're going to find out. So I went over and I pulled the pin and I threw it. It was one of the entrance to the cave, you know. I threw it in there and I was waiting. And the guy grabbed me and pulled me back, you know, because I didn't quite know what to do. I threw it in. He says, "God damn it," he says. And he pulled me back and the thing went off. He said, "You're going to blow your head off." But there was nothing happened. It just blew and that was it, you know. And he said, "Well, guess there's nobody in there." And so I went back down the hill and got in the truck and that was it. But I never fired the rifle until we went to northern China. Back in the States, at Mulford Point, somebody finked on me and said and told my first sergeant that I knew how to type, and so they sent me over to the sergeant major's office to do some typing. And that was a sergeant major by the name of Ed Huff, the master sergeant. Back in those days, there were only 7 pay grades, enlisted pay grades. There was private first class, corporal, sergeant, and then there was a staff sergeant and a platoon sergeant. And they were the same pay grade. The staff sergeant was mostly supply or in some technical job, and platoon sergeant was a field guy. And then they had tech sergeant and gunnery sergeant and master technical sergeant and master sergeant. Okay. Now, the master sergeants sometimes had not extra duties, but titles based on the kind of work that they did. And so sometimes the master sergeant was called sergeant major if he was a sergeant major type person, you know. But it wasn't a rank at that time. It's a rank now. So some master sergeants were not, well, most master sergeants were not sergeant majors, but because you did,
duties were.
yeah, the sergeant major was a duty, you know. So Huff was a field sergeant major, and Hashmark Johnson was the camp sergeant major. Okay. I'd seen this big guy called Huff in China, and he was always hollering at people, and so whenever I saw him, I would run in the opposite direction. You know? And he caught me a couple of times, and, you know, hollered at me, always, "Why are you always running, boy?" You know, he had a high-pitched voice, you know. And but anyhow, I tried to avoid people with stripes, you know. So I went over to report to him, and he said, "I know you." He said, "You're that kid that's always running." And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "I'm sent over here because to do some typing." He said, "You're an idiot. You don't know how to type. Let me see what you can do." You know, I sat down and I typed something out. He says, "Pretty good." Huff was from someplace in Alabama. You know, he came in the Marine Corps in '42. It's now 1946. You may or may not know that no African Americans were in the Marine Corps, before 1942. Just didn't want any of us, you know. So Huff came in '42. It's now 1946. He's a master sergeant. Usually that takes 20 years now. Johnson came in. He went up pretty fast also. But he had Army and Navy time before he came in the Marine Corps. So that's why they call him Hashmark Johnson, because he had 3 hash marks when he came in. Anyhow, I became the typist there for Huff. And Huff was a big guy, loud, a disciplinarian type, but not very bright as far as I'm concerned, you know. Coming from New York, we had an attitude about people from the South, you know. Schools, and it wasn't their fault. The school systems were below par. A lot of the teachers in the racially segregated schools weren't qualified to teach anyhow, you know. Books were second-class books. I mean, the school systems were pretty schlocky. Anyhow, I started typing for Huff, you know. And he mispronounced some words from the field manual, you know. He said, "Machinics of the M1 rifle." That doesn't sound right, you know. So I had the temerity to correct the master sergeant. You know, I was a private. And I said, "I'm sorry, sir." I said, "That's the mechanics of the M1 rifle," you know. Well, that was the end of me, you know. I mean, you don't correct Huff. Well, I got his size 14 and a half up my ass, you know. he literally grabbed me and told me, he said, "How many stripes do you see?" I said, "6, sir." He says, "That's 3 corporals and a whole bunch of PFCs and 2 sergeants." He says, "How many stripes you got?" I said, "I don't have any." He said, "Get your ass out of here." He says, and he grabbed my car. And out the door I went with his foot halfway up my ass, you know. So I was insulted. I was angry that he kicked me, and I went back over to my company office, and I went to the staff sergeant who was acting first sergeant. First Provisional Company was the name of that company. And he said, "What are you doing back here?" And I said, "I got fired." He said, "What happened?" And I explained to them. He says, "Oh," he says, "you don't correct the master sergeant." I said, "That's kind of a no-no." He said, "Next time, keep your big mouth shut, you know." And he says, "Okay," he said, "go back in the warehouse there and tell them I sent you and they'll put you to work." Went in the warehouse. Next day, I hear a big mouth huff out there. He said, "Where's that little kid that you sent over to learn how to type?" The staff sergeant says, "Oh, Sergeant Major," he said, "you said you fired him." He said, "Well, send his dumb ass back over there." He says, I can't find anybody else." So I went back over there, and I worked with him for about 2 weeks. And then I got transferred out to the rifle range as a weapons instructor, which is another part of Camp Lejeune. And I became a weapons marksmanship instructor on the rifle range, the pistol range. And because I knew how to type, they sent me to the office, the range office, where I became the range office clerk, additional duty, for Sergeant Major Boyd Buzzhart, white guy. And the range officer, there were no black officers in the Marine Corps then. The range officer was, I can't think of his name either right now. But those 2 guys were distinguished marksmen. They wore a certain kind of, they were match shooters. They were distinguished marksmen in the Marine Corps. That's pretty prestigious positions to be in. Dutch Livesey was the captain, Captain Dutch Livesey. These guys came in the Marine Corps back in the 30s, you know. These are old salts, as they call them. And then I got another additional duty running the PX, so I got $10 a month extra for that. So I had to sleep in the PX because that's where the safe was and the money was and all that. So my job was to be a weapons instructor, and after we got through firing and went to chow, at 1 o'clock I was in the office, and then at 1600, 4 o'clock, I'd open up the PX, and I would operate that until 8 o'clock. And then people would come in and buy stuff, and soda pop and beer, and, you know, pig feet and whatever, and cigarettes or whatever they wanted, you know. It was a store, and a place where the guys hung out too. And I kept the books, and I kept the money in the safe, and I had my, and those days you had to sleep in the same building where the money was. So I had my own cot in my office and everything. So I made private first class, you know.
You were doing all of this as a PFC.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there was an detachment of about 60 black guys out there, run by Tom Brokaw, the black guy, the gunnery sergeant. He was a tough guy. He's sharp though. So we trained a lot of people, even some white kids who came up from Parris Island, because the Marine Corps, after World War II was over, Marine Corps went all the way down to under 50,000 people. And then around 1946, 47, they had this campaign to get it at least up to 100,000. So major influx of new people coming into the Corps after the war was over, and at both Parris Island and out here in San Diego. And so at Parris Island, they were overwhelmed with people, and so they shipped them up to Camp Lejeune to fire the range for 2 weeks, you know. And so we coached those folks and trained them, even though the Marine Corps was still segregated at the time. So I was at the rifle range for up until 48, during which time I got married in 1947 to a young lady from Wilmington, North Carolina. That's another long story. But then I got transferred out to Camp Pendleton. Of course, you can't take your family with you. If you're below the rank of sergeant, you don't get any benefits. I got out to Camp Pendleton with 50 black guys who were chosen because we were the cream of the crop, as they said. And so we went by train under the leadership of a guy named Hubert Waddell, the staff sergeant. We didn't have any black officers. Usually a second lieutenant or first lieutenant's in charge of a group like that. So we arrived at Oceanside, California by train. After about 5 days of traveling, you know, everybody got off the train, stood on the platform, sun was shining, a beautiful day, young ladies going by in shorts, all the homes on the hill in pastel color. This is God's country, you know, I'd never seen anything like that. And the cattle car arrived, and we ended up in the 14 area at Camp Pendleton. We joined Combat Service Group. Combat Service Group was made up of a bunch of supporting activities. They kept us all together as the depot platoon, of course. And Waddell was in charge. A major came down with a handlebar mustache, tall, good-looking guy. He was cockeyed. And he read us the riot act and welcomed us to Camp Lejeune, you know. And of course, a lot of the white Marines, they were in shock. They didn't know black guys were even in the Marine Corps, you know. When the war was over, you know, everybody got out, like I said, went down very low, and then after the war, people started coming in. So there were a whole bunch of new guys that didn't know anything about the history of the Marine Corps or African Americans in it. So.
Now, your experience coming from Camp Lejeune to Pendleton, was the environment the same at Pendleton in comparison to Camp Lejeune or Parris Island?
Well, at Camp Lejeune, I had two places, Moffett Point or the rifle range, okay? I never went into the other parts of this huge thing called Camp Lejeune. When we got to Camp Pendleton, it was the beginning of racial integration, 1948. We were in the same area with the white guys. The buildings were different, but, you know, we had pretty much the run of the base. Not right away, because Waddell wanted to make sure that we understood what our role was. Our role was to be on our best behavior, to be very professional, to behave ourselves, not get in any trouble because we're being watched. You know, we're setting the tone for racial integration. You know, we wanted to make sure nothing went wrong.
You mentioned they read you the riot act?
That's a way of saying you're giving us all of the information that we need to know that we better adhere to, you know. So Waddell was quite a taskmaster. He was a college graduate, still couldn't become an officer. Very sharp guy, you know. so he had the job as platoon leader, whereas the other platoons in the company were headed up by second or first lieutenant. So he was doing the job of a lieutenant without the pay or the rank.
He was basically just an NCO.
Right.
Still.
And he reported to the company commander just like the lieutenants did. But his whole thing was physical conditioning and inspections, a lot of inspections, and ass chewing, and so forth and so on. He wanted us to be perfect, you know.
Did you guys ever fail at an inspection?
Individuals did, you know, a string hanging off or a dirty rifle or, you know, nitpicking things, you know.
How would he
Didn't really
resolve-
fail, but, you know, the least little thing that was out of place or not right, you know, Waddell was on it, you know, and you would suffer for it by not being able to go anywhere or do anything, you know.
So you would take his liberty.
Oh, yeah. Well, we didn't have any liberty. When we first got there, the only place we could go was to the mess hall and to church on Sundays. But our job was to go do our jobs, which was handling the materials and equipment. I ran the little small bore range, a 22 rifle range, and I made corporal out at that time. And it was, eventually, I think after about 3 weeks, he said, okay, you guys can go down to the slop chute. That's the little place where you can buy beer and hang out and on the base, you know. You could see it from the barracks, you know. Behave yourself, don't get in any trouble. Biggest goddamn fight broke out I was ever in. We went down there that evening. It was about 10 of us, 12 of us. And we stayed to ourselves, you know. Guys have a few beers and shooting a breeze. From over on the other side of the room came an empty beer can. It hit the table. A guy named DeSue, big dude, said, I saw who threw that. I said, hey, they're just trying to provoke us. Take it easy. Don't respond to this. They're trying to start some trouble. You know, the horse, Waddell, we had a nickname, he was a horse. The horse is going to get pissed off if we get in trouble, you know, come on, settle down. So about 10 minutes later, another one came. DeSue says, it's the same guy that's throwing it. I said, Sue, forget about it, you know. Well, as the night went on, the fight broke out. And the guy that was running the slop chute was besides himself. He called the military police. Furniture was broken, noses were broken. I had a black eye. It was terrible. Furniture broke. You know, the military police came. They took 3 guys to the brig, two white guys and 3 black guys. We went back to the barracks. Waddell was a raving maniac. You know, he just couldn't understand
Steve coming out
what
of
the hell happened. You know, we tried to explain. He told us to shut up and get in the barracks. You know, and that was, I wrote my wife. You know, I said, I think I'm going to go to jail. You know. Well, we were again restricted to the barracks and to the mess hall and the church for a couple of weeks. That evening, the major came, the cockeyed guy. He and Waddell had a shouting match. I said, Waddell is shouting at the major. Can't do that. Maybe he's going to go to jail, you know. But anyhow, he got in a Jeep and he disappeared. And he came back with our 3 guys from the brig.
The major?
No, Waddell. I couldn't figure out how he did that, you know. The major disappeared. The major was, I'll think of his name in a minute.
By the way, we've already been going for an hour and a half. Would you like to take a small 5-minute break to use the restroom or?
Oh, okay. So, he got the guys, he got our 3 guys. We never saw the 2 white guys again. But everything leveled off, and after another couple of weeks, we were permitted to go into town, okay, after about a month being there. And we went into Oceanside, and really a delightful place that we were a little apprehensive at first, but the people were lovely, you know, it was not a major problem.
How different was it from the population back east? Were places here segregated by chance, or?
Well, back east it was, but not here, not in California. You know, we were very cautious. You know, we didn't quite know what we could do and what we couldn't do, but there's no segregation at all, you know, no problem. We were told, don't come to Long Beach because it's a Navy town, that's all. You know, you don't want to get in trouble in Long Beach. You know? So we kind of avoided Long Beach. We went to LA on Central Avenue, where that was a African-American hangout on Central Avenue in LA with all the joints and the bars and the restaurants. And it was very nice at that time, you know.
Did you guys ever come to Balboa by chance?
What's Balboa?
Balboa Beach, right over here, Newport, Lagoon.
No, I never even heard of that at that time, you know. We were either in Oceanside or LA, you know. I'm trying to think of that major's name. Oh, why would I forget? His name was James P. Crowe, okay, C-R-O-W-E. Matter of fact, he had a bit part in an old movie called The Sands of Iwo Jima. He had a bit part in that. Anyhow, we called him Jim Crow, you know. So James P. Crow, we called him Jim Crow. Not to his face, though. But then I got orders, myself and another guy got orders transferring us to Philadelphia. That was in 1940, early part of 49. We got transferred to Fort Mifflin, which is a naval ammunition depot outside of the city of Philadelphia on the Schuylkill River. We arrived there, all black detachment there, headed up by 2 white officers, and the sergeant major, master sergeant, was the top black guy there. And we reported in to the sergeant major, a guy named Cecil B. Moore, who later on got out of the Marine Corps, I think around 1952, and went to Temple University and became a civil rights attorney in Philadelphia. But we reported to him, and you know, he fussed at us and paperwork and stuff like that. And he said, go down and report to the field, the barracks gunnery sergeant. Went down, found the barracks gunnery sergeant's office, knocked on the door, came in, and lo and behold, it was the guy that slid open the train door, the boxcar in China. But now he's a gunnery sergeant, and I didn't. He looked dirty. He was cleaned up, you know, and he had his regular Marine Corps uniform on, and we walked in there, and And he said, he recognized me right away. I didn't recognize him right away. He said, well, I'll be damned. He said, the camel killer. And it was Zeke Clausers. Now he's Gunner Sergeant Zeke Clauser, you know. And so we had a little chuckle, and he told the other guy about the camel thing. And so he welcomed us on board, and it was a guard detachment, so our job was to provide main gate security for the depot. Then they had roving patrols, and then they had a pier security. They had 2 piers that the submarines would come in and take on munitions and drop off stuff. So that was it, and we provided security for the base. I got my wife and by that time 1 child up from my youngest boy, up from North Carolina to Philadelphia. We got a little room. This cost $35 a month. This is 1949. We got a little room on Master Street, off of Broad Street, and my daughter was born in the Philadelphia Naval Hospital in 1949. I got a part-time job as a moonlighting bartender on South Street. When I didn't have the duties, I'd work the bar. So you have to supplement your income because you're not making any money, you know. You got kids.
And you're such a low rank, you're not given on base housing or anything
Right.
like that either.
Yeah, I made sergeant that year, and then I got housing. I think it was $15 or $20 a month or something like that, you know. And then the Korean War broke out.
How did you hear about that? And what went through your mind?
I'm trying to think.
June
I
of
can't
1950.
remember. I can't remember how I heard about it. It must have been in the news, you know, on the radio, in the newspaper.
Because at that point, did you ever hear any talk about how they were trying to do away with the Marine Corps and to bring all the branches under one organization?
Oh yeah, that was always that happened several times during my career in the service.
But you were aware of that
Oh, yeah.
at that time too?
Yeah. Truman was one that tried to do away with the Marine Corps. But, you know, there are people in Congress and Senate and Congress that were former Marines and they fought it. Anyhow, the Korean War broke out. We didn't pay much attention to it at the time. But then all of a sudden, like within a week, we were going to be replaced by civilian guards, civilian contract people. And we were all going, those who had time left to serve was going to go ship to Korea. So, take the family, send them back to North Carolina, live with her mother.
A brand new daughter.
Yeah, and myself and a bunch of other guys got transferred out here to Camp Pendleton. The Marine Corps is now integrated, but we were still kept as an all-black organization. And we arrived at Camp Pendleton. We went through 2 weeks of training, and and by ship, off we went. And we joined what they call the 1st Marine Brigade, which was, they were stealing people from all over the Marine Corps to form this brigade. Because at the time, so we found out later, the North Koreans were shoving the Army people down into the south and almost into the ocean. And they wanted to use a brigade to plug holes in the line and to help prevent that from happening. So we
Did you go to Japan first before going to Korea?
Went to Okinawa first, yeah.
How surreal was that for you to go back to Okinawa?
Well, things looked a lot different than when I was there, you know, and they had done a lot of work in building it up. But we were only there for about 3 or 4 days, you know, and we dropped off stuff and drew equipment and what have you, and went back aboard ship. And the next thing you know, we're off the coast of South Korea, and went ashore. Wasn't a tactical situation. We just got off the ship and into the small boats and went ashore, and we were used as sort of fire teams plugging holes in the line up in the hills.
Were you in the Pusan perimeter?
In the Pusan perimeter, yeah, right down to the tip. Well, actually, we moved inland and up into the hills and did battle with the North Koreans, and just to support the Army troops. I think it was the 24th or 25th Infantry Divisions there, and it dawned on most of us that the 24th, 25th Infantry Division were either they were understaffed, they were undermanned, they did not have all of the equipment that they should have had. They were not, mostly ceremonial troops out of Japan, I thought.
Yeah, all guard occupation duty in Japan.
Yeah. They didn't know. I mean, they were doing the best they could, but boy, they needed help, you know.
So when you arrived, what was your job and the situation that you arrived into? You mentioned fire teams.
Yeah, well, I was with the first Marine, 5th Marine Regiment of the 1st Marine Division, and you know, we were a pretty bunch of tough cookies, you know, and so I was a squad leader of a rifle squad, you know.
What were you carrying?
.45 pistol and M1 carbine.
Still had your carbine.
Yeah, and it was hotter than hell, you know. I think I lost about 5 pounds, you know, running up and down hills. But we did battle with the North Koreans on about 15 or 20 occasions. It was a firefight here, firefight there, you know.
Were most of your engagements in, were they far proximity, or were they primarily close proximity, like hilltops or valleys or something like that?
300-400 meters apart, you know.
That's really close.
Yeah, well, it got worse than that, you know. I mean, not in that area, but in other areas. But we weren't there that long. The Army finally got themselves organized, and then they pulled us out and sent us back aboard ship again, you know. Nobody knew what was going on. You never know why all this happens, you know. We went back aboard ship again and floated around in the ocean for about a week or so, I guess. We had no idea what was happening. We found out later what was happening was that the 1st Marine Regiment under Colonel Puller had arrived, okay, in the area. And they were planning, MacArthur was planning this Incheon thing.
Operation Chrome.
Yeah, well, we didn't know anything about that. You know, we were just floating around in the ocean speculating about what was going to happen. And finally, we got briefed, I think, maybe 4 days before the Incheon landing, which was in September or somewhere. They told us that we were going to be doing an amphibious landing in Incheon, South Korea. Where the hell's Incheon? You know, you don't get a lot of information, you know. The next thing you know, the word went down, stand by to offload into amphibious tractors.
So you went into Amtrak's, not CVPs.
Right. And we went down the nets into the Amtrak's.
Did you guys carry anything special in comparison to Busan? Because now this is an amphibious assault. Did you guys have like full packs, or were you still fairly light?
We had all our gear, we had packs and stuff, you know.
Had you had any swimming training prior to this, by the way?
Oh yeah, boot camp, you know, and then we swam a lot, paddling, but and then we had a lot of training going down the nets and in the small boats and back up again, and top side lower and bottom side lower and all that stuff, you know.
So as you're loading into these Amtraks, how long were you on the ship?
That's the first time I'd ever been in an amphibious tractor, you know. We floated around in the ocean for about maybe an hour, and the next thing you know, we were heading for the beach, and we landed at Red Beach, you know.
How bad was the mud?
Not too bad, not too bad. We got almost to the very narrow beach, wasn't that like wide? There was a seawall that guys were going over. We understood that some of the people that went over before we got there got killed. I think the group that I was with, we were like in the third or fourth wave to hit the beach, you know. The other guys, there wasn't much space, so as soon as you hit the beach, you had to move inland. And I think by 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, all the guys that I was with, we were up and over the wall, you know. And
Resistance had collapsed by that point.
pardon?
Enemy resistance had collapsed by that point.
Well, they had a lot of action in the offshore islands, Womedo Island and some other island there. They had to take care of those because they were firing down on the beach, and the North Koreans had the harbor zeroed in it, so we had to get rid of those people first before they could move into the beach.
And you were a platoon leader or a section leader at this point?
I was a platoon, I was a squad leader at the time, but then when we got inland, then we were told, come back to the beach, all the black guys, we were back to the beach. And we became part of what they called graves registration, which was, we were attached to them, and our job was to go out and take care of the dead bodies and bring them back to the beach. And then they had to be identified and what have you, and put on boats and taken back to the ships, you know. We did that for about a week and a half. And then the master sergeant called us all back to the beach again. Well, not on the beach, but above the beach. And so I noticed it was all black guys, you know. There was about 30 or 40 of us there. And then here comes this colonel, this lieutenant colonel, you know. It was a master sergeant first. He said, okay, he said, you people are going to be reassigned. The infantry units, which are in Seoul, are running out of bodies, and so they need reinforcements. So you guys are going to be reassigned. This was big news. This was the first time that I know that African Americans were being assigned to infantry units in the Marine Corps, ever, okay? So we were a little incredulous at the moment. What did he just say, you know? I said, this is really something here, you know? And so we were kind of excited about that. And then comes this lieutenant colonel. So he's, all right, pay attention, you know? And there was a lot of activity going on at the time, you know? There's goo-gobs of boats and ships and people, and there's, you know, you could hear the war going on, you know? And, so he says, you people are going to be reassigned to the infantry units, you know, 1st Marine Regiment, 5th Marine Regiment. And he said, and you, and he points his finger at me, and he says, don't you think I don't recognize you? You know who it was? The major from Combat Service Group, okay, who was pissed off because we got in a fight. So he says, and you, he says, don't, it was,
Not the horse.
no, it was the major, the movie star, I called him. You know?
Who was in Sands of Iwo Jima?
Yeah.
Ben Crow?
No, the Crow, Colonel Crow, Jim Crow.
Jim.
Yeah. So, which is an interesting name. Jim Crow was a period of time during slavery, you know. So we used to get a big charge out of here comes Jim Crow, you know.
But he recognized you.
Well, he said, I don't know how he picked me out, you know, because I had all this gear on, you know. He says, and don't you think I don't recognize you? He says, you're that troublemaker from that got in that fight at the slop shoot. And everybody's looking at me, you know. And I said, what did I do? He said, shut up, goddammit. He says, I'm talking. He was an interesting guy, you know. He came in the Marine Corps back in the 20s, you know.
That's an old soul.
Oh, God, he's been around forever, you know. He was an enlisted man at first, and then But he says, don't you think I don't recognize you? He says, you don't start any crap. He just went on, and everybody was looking at me, you know, and I said, I didn't do anything. He said, shut up. I'm talking, he said. Anyhow, long and short of it is, we had to go across the Han River into Seoul. We got in some trucks. Myself and 7 or 8 other guys were going to 5th Marines, but we had to find them first. You know, they were up north end of the city. Seoul, huge city. As the North Koreans were leaving, they booby-trapped a lot of the buildings. They left a lot of snipers in the area, troublemakers. And so the whole idea was to clean out the city and turn it back over to the Sigmund government. What's his name? MacArthur was pushing for that to happen quickly, you know. And
Where were you guys assigned in the city?
Northwest end of the city. We could only go so far in the trucks. Military police made everybody dismount. And I said, I'm looking for the 5th Marine Regiment, you know. And he said, just keep going, you'll find them, those people, they're somewhere up there. We were wandering around Seoul for about an hour, and we finally found some guys that looked like Marines, you know, and they said, are you guys with 5th Marine? I said, yeah. I says, we're looking for weapons company, 1st Battalion, 5th Marine. And they said, yeah, they're up there somewhere. So we wandered up one road, then another, we found some guys, and we ran right into these people, you know. Said, see the lieutenant. People staring at us, you know, like, what the hell are they doing here, you know? So went over to the lieutenant. I said, Lieutenant, I said, I'm Sergeant Mcdowell. I said, I'm supposed to be assigned to you guys, you know. He says, well, I'll be damned, you know. He kept looking at us, you know. He said, well, this is something new. I said, yes, sir. He said, well, he says, when'd you make sergeant? So I told him. He said, okay. He sent the other guys someplace. He said, you're gonna take over 81 mortar section. He says, go down the road there. He says, and there's an old building that's blown apart. He says, and your guys are gonna be down there. He said, you go see down there and see the sergeant that's in charge, and tell him that you're going to relieve him and you're going to take over that section. So I said, well, maybe you better come and tell the sergeant, sir. He says, no, you can handle it. He says, go. Young lieutenant, you know. So I walked down the road, found the house, the building, went inside. I said, who's Sergeant Henschling? He says, it's over there. And just staring at me, you know. What's he doing here again? I said to Sergeant Henschling, I said, I'm Sergeant Mcdowell, I'm taking over the section. He said, get the hell out of here. I said, Sergeant, I said, you got a problem, go see the lieutenant. I said, all you people in here gather around. And they were a little hesitant. I said gather around. And they all gathered around. I said, I'm Sergeant McDowell, I'm taking over this section from Sergeant Henschling. And I said, and he was out the door as I was talking. And about an hour later, he comes back, you know. And he said, in front of these people, he said, you don't tell me what to do, you don't even talk to me. And he used the N-word a lot, you know. So I said, look, Sergeant, I said, obviously you and I are not going to get along. I said, I don't want any trouble. I said, but make no mistake about it, I'm in charge. You do what I tell you to do when I tell you to do it.
So you were his superior? That's
right. Now, we were both sergeants, but I've been in grade longer than him, okay? Like maybe 6 months. He came in the Marine Corps before me, but he came in 44, I came in 45.
He had more time in grade.
Yeah, he was human and Okinawa, you know. But I had more time in grade, so I was senior. Well, to make a long story short, he and I probably had a fist fight at least twice a week on average, okay, for one thing or another. At the time, you know, I was 22 years old, you know, and this New York came out, you know, somebody call your name, you punch them in the mouth, you know, and that just went on. And it got to a point where it was a big deal. Now, you can't fire mortars. This was a mortar. You can't fire mortars in a city because you'll kill a lot of innocent people. So they used us to clear buildings, snipers and booby traps and stuff like that. So that's what we did. And we became pretty good at it too.
Were there any times that you did encounter a sniper or anything?
Oh yeah, 15, 20 times, you know.
How did you guys deal with that?
Killed them, yeah.
Was it mainly suppressing fire, or was it primarily you guys were kind of embedded within a building?
Yeah, we put a rocket launcher. We used to have the 2.36 rocket launchers, but they didn't do anything for the tanks that the the North Koreans had. They had these old Russian tanks that the 2.36 launchers would just bounce right off of them. So we started getting into 3.6.
So you guys had the super bazookas?
Yeah, and they would go through 11 inches of homogeneous steel and blow on the inside, you know, it's good stuff. But we use those to get snipers out of buildings, just blow half the building apart when it hit. But,
were there any times that any of the snipers surrendered, or were they pretty much diehards being?
No, they would either run away or get killed, one or the other. You know, we got about 15, 20 times. I think we got about 10 or 11 of them, you know. But then the buildings, you have to be careful because, the steps, the doors, everything booby trapped, you know. So we learned the hard way about how to deal with that, you know.
What was the hardest to deal with? Pressure plate mines or wires?
Just wires, grenades and stuff, you know. We tie a rope to it and back off and pull it open. Sometimes we just fire rounds into the steps and go into the building. They'd blow, you know. or we'd go through a window instead of the front or back of the building, you know. We just bust open a window and go through the window.
To avoid the triggering the...
Yeah, yeah. Then you gotta be careful once you're inside, because you know what's inside the building, you know. So, you live and learn, right? You know.
Did your section take any casualties?
We didn't lose anybody. We got a couple of guys wounded, but not at that time. And between me and Hensling having fistfights and that, we finally got pulled out of there. The whole division over a period of a month got pulled back out of Seoul back aboard ship. Again, we thought we were going back to the States, but what they were doing was reorganizing everything and developing plans to go north into North Korea. Of course, we didn't know it at the time. But that's where we went. We got up to into Hungnam, Hamhung, offloaded aboard trucks. Because we're carrying a lot of 81 mortars, you know, you're carrying a lot of gear, you're carrying wire, tubes, bipods, base plates, ammo, you got all this stuff, you know. So we're going, we got to ride most of the way by truck, and then we had to hump it. We got all the way up to a place called Hagaru, and then we...
You ever had Hagaru?
Pardon?
Hagaru?
Yeah, we Hagaru. And then we had to go by foot for the rest of the way up to Udamni. Yeah.
So you guys were on the northern side of the Chosin. Were you on the northern side or the southern side?
Northwest side of the Chosin.
Okay.
Yeah, we were up in Udamni.
You were the 5th. You mentioned. Wow.
5th Marine Regiment.
You were literally at the tip.
Yeah, well, the MSR, there's a road, if you could call it that went out of Hagaru, which was a fairly good-sized village, that went sort of northwest of the, we found out northwest, we didn't know where the hell the reservoir was. So the road sort of went northwest of the reservoir. And then the 7th Marine Regiment was to the left, the northwest of the main supply route, and the 5th Marine Regiment was to the northeast of the main supply route, you know, up in the hills. We could look down and see parts of the reservoir, you know. That's how high up we were. We were about 6,000, 7,000 feet, 5,000, 6,000 feet maybe.
And how cold was it when you first arrived in the area?
It was getting cold. It was getting pretty cold, and we didn't have a lot of cold weather clothing at the time either. But in my area, we set up our fire direction center. We ran the wire. We put out the forward observers. You know, we set up the guns. We zeroed them in so that we could support infantry units down in the valley. And that's where we stayed. And I think it was late October we started picking up Chinese prisoners. You know.
Here and there, not just individuals.
Yeah, they didn't look like North Koreans. They weren't equipped like North Koreans. Didn't see too many North Korean soldiers at that time, you know. And when we were running, the rifle companies were running a lot of patrols out, you know. And but what was happening is that they would move at night. Okay, and then at the daytime you didn't see anything, and then they'd move again at night, you know. And I would say probably late October, early November is when we start seeing large numbers, you know. even before what I've read since then, we start seeing Chinese soldiers,
Large troop
large movements, off in the distance, before the books that I read said they.
before the main assault on
Yeah.
your position.
Yeah.
Can you recall the night when you heard the Chinese bugles and their offensive opened up?
When?
Can you recall when you first
It was
experienced
late
that?
November. Yeah, I heard whistles, a lot of whistles. Not too many bugles at first, but a lot of whistles. And then later on bugles, you know.
Were you guys just sitting around inside of the wire or in your position?
No wire, we just got the gun set up in the hills, you know. A lot of activity, a lot of patrols going out. You know, we're setting up ambushes and things like that, and nothing happened, you know. And then all of a sudden, all hell broke loose, you know. One evening, about 7 or 8 o'clock, I don't know where all these Chinese people came from, you know. The first time I saw a significant number of Chinese, there must have been 300 or 400 of them, you know. I thought I thought they were crazy. I mean, you don't attack like that, you know, that many people. It was like around dawn, like maybe 6 or 7 or 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, you know, and they came straight at us, you know.
Can you describe how they came at you?
Yeah, in hordes, and you know, they just kept running at us. I couldn't believe it. I was astounded that they would do that, and we killed them. You know, we were running out of ammo. There were so many of them. You know, I thought they were nuts. I found out much later, like months later, about a month later, from prisoners, that they were told that when this is a peasant army, you know, these kids weren't very bright, you know. They were told by their leaders that we would run when we saw them coming, that Americans would run in fear, you know, we'd throw down our weapons. So keep running at them and they will leave, you know. And the prisoners were in shock when they found out that didn't happen, you know. We picked up some Chinese officers that spoke English, pretty good English. Some of them went to school in the States, you know. They spoke good English. And they were not very well equipped, not very well clothed. Some of them didn't even have weapons. You know, they just pick up the dead guy's weapons. I didn't understand how they could put an army in the field like that with very little training, not telling them the truth, not having the kinds of things that they need to have to sustain themselves over a long period of time in a battle situation. The foot gear, you know, mostly tennis shoes and rags, you know.
Foot rags.
Yeah, not. The Chinese army was not to be feared. The only thing they had going for them was numbers, you know.
And the element of surprise in your main MSR was surrounded by.
They were very good about moving at night, but that was about it, you know. They did try to infiltrate at nighttime because you can't see your hand in front of your face up there. They did attempt to infiltrate at night. We lost some guys who get out of their sleeping bags quick enough. I know I lost one guy like that. Some friends of mine, the Murphy brothers, two black guys, that I was stationed at Pendleton with, were killed in, I heard they were killed in sleeping bags, you know.
Was your position overrun, or did you guys maintain your position?
We got overrun a couple of times, yeah.
What did you do during that?
Pardon?
What did you do during when you guys were overrun?
Well, you really can't, it's so dark at night, you can't see what was happening. You just have to use your ears and your sense of smell as much as possible and hope like hell that the people around you will take care of you. But my fire direction center and where my guns were set up, it was kind of hard to overrun us. Our forward observers got overrun a couple of times. Even though I pulled them back a couple of times, they got overrun. One evening, they infiltrate at night. The Chinese will infiltrate at night, and if possible, they will try to steal clothing from the Marines and put it on, so that you know, if you get a kind of a look, you can't tell who they are, you know. And I was behind my second and third gun, trying to. I really sleep at night, because I didn't trust myself, you know. I would doze normally during the day, catch a few winks during the day. But this one particular evening, and I didn't get in the sleeping bags, you know. I was up against a little rise in the ground, and I was dozing a little bit. And something, I wasn't quite sure what alerted me, but I think it was a combination of movement and smell, you know. Something didn't smell right. And next thing I know is something or somebody fell on top of me, you know. And my instincts told me that this was not a good thing. And I said something, and I didn't get the kind of response, so the fight was on. And I heard some other guy say something, but I wasn't quite sure what it was. And the whole thing lasted about 2 minutes, you know. It was a Chinese soldier that had stumbled over me somehow or another, and he was trying to kill me, you know, and it didn't work. So we were in a knife fight. That's what it was. And so I got a couple of nicks up my arm, and he didn't make it, you know. And of course, when the sun came up, or when it got lighter, I found out this guy, he couldn't have been more than 14 or 15, 16 years old, you know. And he was Chinese. And he didn't have a rifle or a weapon or anything like that. All the only thing he had was a knife, you know. And filthy dirty. I think that's where I got the smell. Everybody came over to look. So one henchling, the sergeant, he said, he's nothing but a kid, you know. And that bothered me for a few days, you know, but, you know.
Either you or him.
Yeah. We got the word to pull out of UDMD and moved back to Hackaroo, but that took a week. It's only maybe 6 or 7 miles, but it took, you know, you got 1st Marine Regiment, 5th Marine, not 1st, 7th Marine moving out, 5th Marines moving out. We had some British people with us, you know, and some Turks, you know. And so we all got back down to Hargaroo, and then we found out they were building the airfield down there. And that was big news because planes were coming in now and dropping off stuff and taking casualties out, and that was a big morale booster, you know.
And how cold was it by this point?
It was well below zero, 15, 20 below on average.
And how were you able to consume your rations or any food or drink water?
Well, water froze, you know, we just melt snow, you know. And when you melt snow, you don't get much water. So you have to melt a lot of snow to get water, you know, and drink it before it freezes up. You know. You know, sea rations, you have the heat tabs that use to warm up sea rations and stuff. I always tell my troops, when you're walking across cultivated fields, scarf up the peppers and the onions and the garlic and whatever you can find, you know. So we always had stuff we could add to the sea ration ingredients, you know. We always had some extra stuff, you know. And makes you feel a little good to warm up a can of the beans and, you know, chop up some garlic and put it in there. But things started to improve. When we got back down to Hargaroo, the move was we were pulling out of the reservoir area by then, you know, little by little. It was tough going because the Chinese were in the hills firing down on the main Sarai route. So they put Marines up in the hills to try to protect the main column as they were pulling out. Because you're talking not only Marines, but you got a lot of civilians coming out too. 15, 20,000 of them, you know. We wanted to get out of that area.
And you have the Army component on the northern side or the eastern side of the reservoir too.
Say again?
You have the Army component too also trying to...
Well, yeah, you had the 10th Army and some other Army outfit coming up the West Coast. Matter of fact, I found out later that was a flawed concept where you split the armies like that, because all the Chinese did was put a wedge in between, you know. And then they never hooked up, the guys coming up from the West Coast never hooked up with us, you know. And so it was, I think, the Army general was in charge of the 10th Army by the name of Allman or somebody like that. And O.P. Smith, who had the 1st Marine Division, thought he was an idiot. You know, they argued a lot, you know. And O.P. Smith, Oliver P. Smith, you know, he come in the Corps in the 20s, you know. He was an old pro. And he said he took his time and he got that airfield built. And that really, really made the difference, you know. But we got out of there. We got out of there before New Year's, you know, before Christmas, actually.
At Hangaroo, were you still providing fire support?
As we pulled back, we were, okay. You know. If you can imagine, you know, you got 30,000 Allied forces, maybe 35,000, you know. It was a mixture of British and Americans, and it was a UN force, you know. And as they were pulling out, heading towards Onam, you had to also protect the rear. And the Chinese were closing in, okay? And you get down on this narrow road heading out, and then they got the goddamn bridge they got blown out, so they had to replace that, and that held up everything. So you got all these civilians, you got these women having babies in the middle of the road. You know, it's a big operation.
Not to mention how cold it is too.
Yeah. And Chinese up in the hills firing down. My guys and I, we were up in the hills chasing, killing them, you know. And finally we got down to, what do they call it, Coterie. They finally had us come back down onto the road, you know, because we're half froze to death, you know. Some other guys went up. We came down, and we were sitting on the side of the road. I had one dead kid in a sleeping bag. We were dragging him along with us. And everybody had busted fingers. And I had wounded guys who didn't want to say anything about them being wounded, you know, minor wounds and things. Everybody had teeth problems and dysentery and, you know, you name it.
Did you have frostbite yourself?
Not too much. No, not too much. My problem was dysentery, you know. Off camera, I'll tell you a little bit about that, because that's pretty bad stuff.
Because I can't even imagine having dysentery in one of the coldest places on earth at that point being fired at.
Yeah.
How can you even relieve yourself without it freezing to you?
That's what I'll talk to you about later, but it was very uncomfortable and a very difficult time, you know. But long and short of it all, we all got down to Hongnam. Within a week or so, everybody's back aboard ship, or at least my group was back aboard ship. We were, you have to.
We probably have maybe about a minute left because my camera's about to die. Just
Okay.
FYI.
We're back aboard ship, and I went to sleep. I think I slept for 24 hours. I woke up, my clothes were all stuck to me. They had a pile of old Navy clothes or something in the. I took everything off. I took a shower. I broke all the rules. I must have been in the shower at least 45 minutes, you know. I looked at my body and I didn't recognize me, you know. I went and put on some of those old Navy clothes or whatever they are, and I took everything I had, my clothing, except my equipment. I threw it in the ocean. Not supposed to do that, but I threw it in the ocean. I didn't want to see any of that stuff again. And went down to the mess deck, got something to eat, and all that came up. Eventually, though, after about 4 or 5 days, I was okay, you know. The stomach just wasn't cooperating. Yeah. So we ended up in South Korea, offloaded, reorganized, got replacement people in. A lot of the guys had to go back to the States. New equipment, down there about a month, you know, month and a half. Resting up, medical care, dentists, stuff like that.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Gary just died.
Yeah.
That was a perfect stopway point because I still have a lot of questions that I'd like to ask you, but unfortunately we've already been talking for 2.5 hours.
Oh.
And what I'd be hoping is if you'd be okay coming back to finish this oral history, because I have to recharge this.
Yeah, it'd have to be sometime in April, around mid-April.
Because I'd love to capture your story about Vietnam, because we didn't even touch upon
Yeah,
it.
you know.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I guess I get carried away talking too
No,
much.
I mean, this was phenomenal,
Yeah.
Jack. You went into so much detail. I have gained such a perspective from you about what life was like because I'm a West Coaster. I'm born and
Yeah.
raised here in the West. To hear about the East Coast and what life was like, and then coming out here,
Yeah.
that to me is so
Yeah.
fascinating.